12, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Tom Fulkerson. I'm your qualifying broker, and I want to welcome you and thank you for taking the time to join me today on Broker Chat. And today I'm going to preach. Y'all ready for some preaching?
Amen.
Amen.
I got to hear an amen.
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 Okay. So today I want to talk about where we are in this new market and what we need to be doing to protect ourselves and our clients. As many of you know, we have had some very, very strange circumstances, and this whole conversation is going to be surrounded by things that I've experienced with some of you, most recently, Joseph, about just some very strange things that are going on in the market and what we have to do as professionals to really step up our game and be the very, very best realtors out there, because there's a lot of sloppy work going on with a lot of realtors, and we've got to be on top of our game to protect our commissions and our clients. Okay, so that's what today's sermon is all about. So the first thing I want to talk about is assumptions. We cannot assume anything. So if you are meeting, and I encourage you to, if you're not, meeting with buyers and meeting with sellers, explaining where we are in the market, and giving them a really good description of things that are happening that we need to be prepared for. And by that, I mean, we have buyers that are walking away from transactions because the seller didn't do the repairs that they wanted them to do, and they didn't do them in the time frame in which the contract called for. So how can we really button up that so that that does not become an issue? And I want some conversation here with you guys, and I'd like to hear what you're doing or what you think you could do better. And so please turn your microphones off and raise your hands, because this is going to be a very, we're going to have some conversation today, and I encourage you to participate. So what can we do better in our contracts to prevent buyers from being upset over sellers not doing repairs within a timely time frame or to the buyer's satisfaction?
Hey, Tom, Joseph here.
Hey, Joseph, thank you for interjecting.
Yeah, one, I think option, it depends on what the appraisal came back or the inspection and if it was appropriate, but to see if we could get concessions for those repairs instead of having the seller take care of them. Then if we can get some reasonable amount and that could be approved by the lender, that might be one option.
Yeah, that's a really great idea. How about also you as the buyer's agent, just following up, going out to the property before the walkthrough and ensuring that things are done? How about if you write into your contract that the repairs must be done to the buyer's satisfaction within 4 days of closing, and go out there 4 days before closing so that we're not scrambling at the last minute? How about that?
That raises a great question, Tom, because what I've heard, because I usually do 3 days. Thank you. I can use 4. I say they need to go out there at least 3 days before. But what is buyer satisfaction? And
Yeah, that was
people
exactly my point.
wrestle with, I can fix it, but I'm not going to make it, pristine or whatever the situation may be. That's some of the verbiage I've heard when talking about buyer satisfaction.
Yeah. The issue that I face as a broker is that I get phone calls and we didn't write anything into the contract that says it has to be done to the buyer's satisfaction. And then we get out there the day before closing and the buyer thinks the work has been done sloppily. And in all fairness to you as a buyer's agent, you also, and we're working with folks that will look at the very last minute to get out of a contract if they want to try and get out of a contract. So maybe that's not the best verbiage to use, but I do think that as a buyer's agent, that we need to be very cognizant that those repairs are done in a professional manner. And I will tell you that, from my perspective, and I know every case is a little different, but from my perspective, I would much rather negotiate a settlement on any type of repairs that need to be done, unless it's something major that's going to require it to be done in order for the loan to be funded. But I would much rather get either a price reduction or or closing costs. Closing costs really, that's coming out of the buyer's pocket. So if we negotiate and they have to come out of pocket less and they can afford to do their own repairs, to me, that's always the best case scenario, because then they've got a vendor who they know that they've hired. And if that vendor doesn't do the work properly, they can at least go back to that person and get them back out there to try and make things right. As you know, and I'm sure you will agree, most sellers, if they have to do repairs or have repairs, they're doing it on a shoestring budget because they don't really want to spend a whole lot of money. And so this is just something I want you all to think about, because I get more calls at the last minute with either buyers or sellers wanting to back out of a transaction because either the repairs weren't done or they weren't done within the time frame that we put in the contract. And you know what? That's our job. Our job as the listing agent is to make sure that those things are done. And our job as a buyer's agent is to make sure those things are done. So let's not scramble at the last minute. And this is just one example of, where we are in the market today with buyers and sellers. And I'd love some more feedback on this topic. If you have something to share, I'd love to hear it from you.
Well, I want other people to share, but since we are really into this, as you know, with our transaction, I've learned a lot recently. One thing that on the seller and buyer is documentation, not just waiting to the last minute when certain repairs are done or the AC needed, that you have something signed off by a licensed person saying that is hence been corrected. Even photographs. If you needed to put putty someplace, you take a picture and show the putty, and you don't wait to to the last minute. You send that over to the buyer's agent, or so that they can see that these repairs have been made. Then they can do the visual inspection, but giving them documentation of each and every item that needed to be addressed.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. And also, I feel like, and I've expressed this to you guys before on many of these calls, is that the GAR form notice form is the most underutilized form that we have, and probably the most helpful form that we have to document where we are in a transaction. And so if you're not using that form, you should be. because it's a great way to document. It's a great way to notify people that, hey, Mr. Seller, you're supposed to have repairs done 4 days, and today is the fifth day, and we just came from the property and nothing's done. What's the game plan? I just think that all of these things are critical at this point in the market because of the volatility of the people that we're, serving.
Well, and I can say, can you hear me, Tom?
I can. Hi, Carlin. How are you?
Good. How about you? Thanks.
I'm good.
I'm down at the gift mart, which is, I'm sitting on a floor in a hallway. So,
Okay.
yeah, I was going to say one of the things, like you said, if we can throw money at it, that usually is the easiest because the seller, they'll give you $1,000 to fix this, that, and the other thing rather than have to do it. If they do not want to do that, and I do have to put it in the contract, I'm very specific about the repair. It had, the right-hand top corner cabinet in the kitchen needs to be repainted, fixed, leveled, whatever. I'm very specific. And like you said, I always say all receipts and or pictures, it kind of depends on the circumstances, to be sent to the buyer, me, not less, sorry about that, than 4 days before closing. And then at 4 days before closing, if I haven't gotten the receipts, if I haven't gotten the pictures, I'm on that phone until I get it or over to the property to check on it. And most of the times that solves the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I dealt with it, and that's perfect. So thank you. I dealt with a situation over the weekend where one of our agents represented a buyer on a lake property transaction. And in the MLS, it stated that the golf cart was going to be conveyed with the property. Well, it wasn't on the seller's disclosure that it was being conveyed. And the agent didn't write it into the contract, which should have happened. And guess what? No golf cart when they went out 2 days later after they closed just to view the property. And so now I'm in the middle of it with the other broker saying we want our golf cart, knowing that honestly, we didn't do the right thing. We should have written it into the contract. But that agent that listed the property should have not put it in the listing. And she told my agent that, well, that was just with a full price offer. Well, that's not what it says. It says being conveyed with the property. So I'm having to argue now with that broker that they have, and I haven't spoken to him yet, but if they give me any pushback, I'm going to say, y'all are false advertising, and I'm going to report you to the real estate commission for false advertising. So we'll see if that does the trick or not. But honestly, this would have all been avoided had we just written into the contract that the golf cart was included in the sale of the property and was remaining with the property. These are the little details, guys, that we cannot afford to overlook. I know that Joseph, who's on this call, has been dealing with a seller who was all gung-ho in the very beginning, loved everything Joseph had to say. We went under contract, and then suddenly now they don't like him for whatever reason, no reason. So now, after everybody going back and forth with these people, they finally have decided they do not want to sell. So I don't know how that could have been avoided. It's just another glaring example of how volatile clients are right now for whatever reason. And I think just to avoid these types of conversations, we just need to be very clear up front. And honestly, maybe in this case, it would have been a good a good idea in retrospect to take a retainer fee up front. Don't forget, you can do that. You can take retainer fees from sellers and you can take retainer fees from buyers. And I think that we are remiss in not addressing that and not doing that, particularly right now with all the volatility in the market.
Hey, good morning. Good afternoon, everybody. How you
Hi,
doing?
Nick. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Of course, I've dealt with a similar situation where I
Of
was
course you have.
right the buyer, and we had a great offer. Everything was great. And so the inspection, I had it all written out. Maybe somebody could say, well, the T's wasn't crossing dotted, but I mean, you look at it, it looked crossing. I mean, or by traditional standards, it looked crossing dotted, right? And it was specific on what was supposed to be done. But at one point, the seller said that she thought the buyer was getting too much of a deal, and she wasn't going to do anything else. So, unfortunately, at that, my buyers end up, terminating on closing day. They flew down from Philly to purchase a home. But just to back up a little bit, I actually inspected a property 3 days prior. That was in the amendment to address concerns as well. Went out, inspected, the repairs were not done, created a couple of long emails, just outlining what was not done and what needs to be done. At some point, the seller said she wasn't going to do anything, wasn't going to give any concessions. The buyers ultimately ended up terminating, which that wasn't a recommendation by me, but we lost that earners money fight, right? We made it up in the next deal, but the seller just simply said she wasn't going to do it, right? She wasn't going to complete the repairs, and that's what we were stuck at. Even though we provided documentation, we provided photos, we provided emails from several different people that were aware of what was happening and actually inspected the property. It's the seller just decided not to do it. So what's the recourse from the seller if they just decide they don't want to do anything else? Like they're done with doing anything.
Yeah, it's, there are certain situations where we can cover ourselves and our buyers as best we can. But I mean, there's just some things that you're not going to be able to control. And I think the purpose of this conversation is to acknowledge that, but also to acknowledge that we need to step up our game and do a better job of following up documentation and not taking anything for granted. And, honestly, it might be wise to have conversations with your clients about some of the things that you and your broker have seen happen in this market right now. And that, I think if they're prepared for that and we can come up with a solution or a plan B to make it sting less, then I think that is something that needs to be considered right now.
Yeah, and we were able to make up on it on the next deal. So the client didn't fire me. We actually went and purchased a home and did it the right way again, right? Just that particular seller was about doing good business. We had one that didn't want to do good business and one that did, and we actually closed with the one that wanted to do good business. So if someone doesn't present good business, you can do all the great realtor stuff you can do, but it still will turn out bad, right?
Right.
I agree with you. But the only thing that I wasn't prepared for that. That's never happened. Like I've never had a seller say they're going to do something and I've never.
And that's why we're having this phone call today, because this is happening more and more and more, and it's becoming more normal than it is abnormal. And I just want you guys to be prepared and be able to handle it, because it consistently comes to me now, and it's always last minute stuff. But enough about repairs, but let's also talk about, this same thing applies to earnest money. It applies to anything that is negotiated in that contract, but earnest money is something that we all need to be on top of. We need to be able to make sure that we've collected that and that it makes sense in the way it's collected and delivered, because that is your seller's liquidated damages. If you have a flaky buyer who decides to walk away at the last minute, that's their liquidated damages. And so I still think that we're not collecting enough earnest money to make it hurt for a buyer to walk away from a transaction. Because if you've collected $1,000 or $1,500 on a $250,000 property, or it's not enough. It's not enough to hurt for that buyer to be able to say, I'll just lose $1,500 and walk away, and I'll be done with this. So I want you all to think about that. I think that we also need to be cognizant of when that earnest money should be delivered. And in my opinion, it doesn't need to be 3 days from binding agreement date. It needs to be within 24 hours, if not sooner, depending on who you're working with and if they have a checkbook or not. And, I always like to say old school was the best way to do it. I always collected my checks, made copies of them, and sent them with the offer along with the instructions to closing attorney. So there was no discrepancy in terms of what I was getting paid. So Sharon Anderson, you've got your hand up.
Good afternoon.
How are you? Where's your
I'm
pretty
great.
face today?
Let me see. It's going to show up. You can't see me because of where I'm situated. But at
Okay,
any
no
rate,
worries.
okay. I just want to make sure I understood what Nick was saying in reference to his situation. Did the seller agree to those repairs and then decided not to do them, Nick?
That's correct.
Okay, so my question, Tom, is in a case like that, his buyer lost their earnest money, if I understood it correctly.
That's correct. It was
Could
awarded.
they have not sued that seller to try and get their earnest money back since that seller defaulted?
I don't know if there would have been any kind of legal, legal recourse we could have taken. I'm not sure. But again, that was the first time I had earnest money in however many years I've been in real estate get awarded to the other side. But hey, it was just one that went against us. We didn't take any legal. My buyer didn't take any legal actions. We just knew we would make up the difference on the next deal, right? And we just didn't go to war and fight over it, but it actually ended up working out in our favor because that house that we were trying to get didn't sell, and we didn't have to do business with that particular party. But I don't know the legal recourse. Maybe Tom knows, but I don't know. I didn't give my buyer legal advice at all.
Here's the situation, Sharon. Seth Wiseman, who drafts our contracts, there's a very, very gray line between what's considered a material breach. Okay. And I don't remember, Nick, the whole scenario around this, although I do remember the transaction because you and I spoke about it. But if it's something that's extremely minor, Seth Wiseman says it's not material enough for a closing not to happen. And I don't know if that's the case with this situation. I really don't remember all the details around it, but I have been asked before if it was something very, very minor that didn't occur, but it wasn't significant enough for the transaction not to close. And that comes from an attorney who drafts our contracts, not from Tom Fulkerson.
Yeah, I understand. Like Nick, he said, for me, I'm the same as what he said in reference to having clients lose earnest money. I've only had it happen once in almost 24 years, and it's something I really, really hate to see happen. But just wondering if they had any recourse.
Yeah, I mean, my personal take on it is, if you're in default, you're in default. And but sometimes people that are smarter than me have other ideas. And so ultimately this turned out well for Nick's clients.
Right, right,
And that's at the end of the day, that's the main thing.
right. Dates.
Okay, so we've talked about the earnest money, and you all realize that if earnest money has not been delivered per the contract, we need to notify those parties in writing. Again, use of the notice form is a very appropriate form to use here. And the buyer has 3 banking days to make good on the funds. And if they don't make good on those funds within 3 banking days, then the seller has a choice of either terminating the contract or moving forward with the contract with no earnest money. But who would want to do that? Who would want to move forward with no earnest money? If they've already defaulted on that, why would you assume they're going to close on this transaction? So no earnest money, no deal is what I say. I had an interesting conversation with an agent in Buckhead last week because they didn't think it was fair that the buyer actually had time to produce the earnest money after they didn't adhere to the contract originally. But you know, everybody has the right to cure the default, even up until the day of closing. We cannot terminate a contract, even if the buyer says they're not going to close. We can't terminate that contract until the closing date comes and goes, because everybody at the end of the day has the right to change their mind and show up with a suitcase full of cash and close the transaction if they want to close it.
And I can mention another kind of point of view of the earnest money thing. I'm in East Atlanta, so I sell a lot in town. And there are people that are buying perfectly good houses, handing a bunch of cash over and saying, here, we're going to just knock it down. But so if a buyer does not give enough earnest money, then the seller is more like, let's say we put down an offer for $400, it's accepted, everything's good. We give them $2,000 worth of earnest money, as opposed to say $7,000 or $8,000. Well, the seller, if someone comes in and said, okay, we're here $425 in cash, but you have to walk away from that deal, seller's still going to make out good if all they have to do is give back $2,000 in earnest money. So if the buyer is making it, also is not only is going to hurt them if they walk away, but it will hurt the buyer, the seller, if the seller chooses to walk away because they get a better offer. And luckily that didn't happen to me, but I could see that happening with this particular investor seller.
Well, and I have dealt with those situations. Thank you for bringing that up. And what those sellers don't understand, it's more than the earnest money if they decide to walk away.
Yeah.
That buyer can sue them for performance. The brokers can sue them for their commission. It's much more than that $2,000 worth of earnest money that they have at risk.
Yes.
And I've had conversations with sellers about that, and they have decided to stick with their contract because when you lay out all the numbers that they would eventually be responsible for, it ain't pretty. And so if they think they're going to get a better deal, and we think that's why Joseph Watkins people backed out or are backing out, because they think they can get more money. And greed never leads to anything positive, my friends. And so we'll see what happens in that case.
That's an excellent quote, Tom,
What's that?
about the greed never leads
No.
to anything positive.
No. A good deal has to be a good deal for both parties, or it's not a good deal, period. And, I think people have sort of lost sight of that in all the chaos that we've gone through in the last 4 or 5 years in the real estate world. But we are finally at a point now where, I mean, there are still multiple offers on certain houses in certain neighborhoods. And then there are houses that are just sitting there waiting for the market to catch up with them. And, and so the whole purpose of this call is to make you guys aware that we've got to do a top-notch job and be extremely buttoned up in every aspect of our contract writing, our negotiating, our conversations with potential buyers and sellers. And, that's the crux of it today. No room for sloppiness, period. Who else has something they'd like to talk about or contribute? Y'all are awfully quiet today.
I'll contribute.
All right.
So I have had a lot of rocky transactions in the last like 4 or 5 months, all kind of the things that you're talking about where, I think just consumers as a whole feel sort of have some sort of entitlement right now. And then also they just feel like they have to be on higher alert about getting taken advantage of, so to speak, because of just how everything has swung in so many different ways. And so what I'm trying to be more mindful of, and to your point about documentation and always, not making assumptions, is the general consumer seems to have like a mob mentality right now. And if there might not be the same sort of things you can do to talk sense into people that are living in a very irrational space. And so I still just try to do what is logical, what is like black and white to the book. I do not have clients anymore that I don't have exclusive agreements right up front. I don't care how long I've been friends with them. And try to focus on the people.
Hard way, didn't you?
Oh my God, yes, I did. So yeah, it's just sort of, that's the way that I've been able to make sense of something that doesn't quite make sense, is just, again, this mob mentality, and go to focus on the people who are motivated and, really want to just move on out of what is seemingly like a very chaotic time, and just do what you can. And like you said, no assumptions, and document everything.
Yeah. You're right. I mean, this conversation really at a much higher level is really about where people and their heads are today because of whatever in this world has made them that way. And I think that, and I've shared this with you guys before, I think that, especially in real estate, consumers, I think they felt like they had to shaft for so many years because they wanted to buy a house and they couldn't. And somebody with an extra few bucks was able to get it over them. And I think that people, especially buyers, they're pissed. They're just, they're mad. And who could blame them, honestly? And I think, sellers, I'm just talking in generalities here, guys. I think there's a lot of sellers who still think that they are going to get, multiple offers on their house, and it, it can be priced at whatever price it wants. They deem it should be, and they're going to get multiple offers on it, and they don't have the reality check yet to understand that's not where we are today. And there's a culmination of issues that have changed that dynamic, including interest rates, including inventory, the jobs market, the economy as a whole, all of those things that are much loftier than what I deal with, but I think, cause a lot of the frustration that people are experiencing now, which has led to a call like this. So thank you, Downtown, for sharing that. All right, guys, anything else? I've worn out my soapbox. I'm here to answer any questions that you might have about anything. So if you do, now's the time. Or otherwise, I don't like to keep you just for the sake of timing. So, anyone else have anything they'd like to talk about today? Do you guys have any suggestions about what you'd like this call to cover with either Deborah or myself? Please let us know. We're always looking for ideas to help you and to give you what you need in your business. That's why we have these calls. And so I guess go have a nice lunch and a great day. And we'll see you next time on Broker Chat.